Eelmisel kolmapäeval oli Bukarest 9 formaadi juures ka USA abivälisminister Karen Donfried, kes äsja tööd alustanuna tegi oma esimese välisvisiidi just meie piirkonda ehk kuulas ära julgeoleku, aga ka mõned muud mõtted Rootsis, Eestis ja Norras. Meie vestlus algaski küsimusega Rootsis kuuldu ja nähtu kohta.
Based on my days so far here in Estonia, I would say the Swedes share many of the same concerns that Estonians do about security policy.
Such as?
And in particular, that would be the concern about increasingly aggressive Russian behavior and wanting to understand NATO's role. And I was very happy to affirm the U.S. commitment to Estonia's security and our steadfast commitment to the Article 5 guarantee in NATO.
So how can you put those words in deeds, let's say? How can you make that commitment visible?
Well, and here you get to an important distinction between Sweden and Estonia, because Sweden is not a NATO member and Estonia is. And I would argue that President Biden made the commitment clear when he went to the June NATO summit. And he affirmed the U.S. commitment to Article 5 and affirmed the presence we have across the Baltics, the enhanced forward presence that you see here, where NATO members are present on your territory, the exercises we're doing. I think there are many clear examples of NATO's engagement in the region that speak to that deep American commitment. I think we also can look to the fact, if you look at a broader agenda of how we define security, there's military security, there's economic security, there's climate security. We saw the president immediately have the United States rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. We had the president, in terms of health security, say that the United States would no longer plan to withdraw from the World Health Organization. And I think you've seen tremendous American commitment across the board, from vaccines to ongoing research to help us overcome the pandemic. On climate, you will see President Biden engage at COP26, the next big climate conference at the beginning of next week. And in terms of economic security, I want to make clear how grateful we are to Estonia for helping President Biden achieve one of his priorities, which is the global minimum tax. When we engaged at the OECD, that was a big achievement for us collectively, to stop the race to the bottom and to ensure tax fairness. And I think what's important about that is it makes the case to our citizens that Estonia and the United States working together can deliver concrete benefits to Estonians and to Americans.
How can you mend ties with Europe after Trump? And because we cannot go back to the old good days before Trump, because it seems that we haven't learned anything. So what is the next step forward? And we have learned from Trump times.
Let me start by just reminding us of what fundamentally connects the United States and Estonia. The NATO alliance, our bilateral relationship, is based on a shared belief in democracy and in the values that undergird democracy, rule of law, freedom of speech, all of these things that both of us have fought for. And that foundation is under challenge. We've seen it in the United States. We have deep political polarization. We have our own internal challenges. I think Estonia has challenges with its democracy, and this is why President Biden is hosting the Summit for Democracy this December, for us to come together and say, how can we strengthen our own democracies? What are the commitments we're making internally to be better Democrats, small d Democrats? Why do I begin with that? Because we then need to scope out and say, what's happening in the world? There is a major autocratic challenge two democracies. Russia surely is an example of that. China is another example. The United States has always been an Atlantic power and a Pacific power. We have coasts that face both of those oceans. And we can meet both of those challenges without saying one is more or less important than the other. So I think in the NATO context, the immediate military challenge would be seen as coming from Russia. But we are also saying we need to focus on an increasingly assertive China. And it's not about Estonia or NATO going to the Pacific. It is recognizing the reality that China is here in Europe. That is through the Belt and Road Initiative, through economic coercion. It is through 5G networks that are directly related to our security. So it's saying we need to look at those challenges facing us and come up with a common approach to how we will meet those challenges. So this is not an either or, it is an and, that we together need to be facing these challenges of the 21st century.
Are relations with Russia at their lowest right now? Stoltenberg said, so what do you think about it?
The relationship with Russia today is extremely complicated. And I will share with you that the last time I was in government was in 2013 and 2014. I was working on the National Security Council then. So I saw the crisis and then war in Ukraine unfold. And it was chilling to see Russia illegally annex the sovereign part of its weaker neighbor in 2014. So I think there are many things we can point to in recent years that have led us to the point that we are today. Biden administration, President Biden has been clear that he would like to have a stable and predictable relationship with Russia. But we also understand,
I would
we
say.
also understand that we don't control that. And if Russia doesn't want a stable and predictable relationship, we're not going to have it. So we had the meeting between our president and President Putin earlier this year. That has been followed by 2 convenings of the Strategic Stability Dialogue to try to have strategic stability on the arms control front, to try to mitigate risks. But we are very well aware of Russia's malign behavior, and we will confront Russia when it does things that go against our interests and go against our values.
So exactly, that was my next question. How do you balance with defending the values and confronting Russia, or the need to engage in some issues with Russia?
I think we have, that's what I meant when I said we have a complicated relationship. So if there are areas where we can cooperate, we want to cooperate. If there are areas where we fundamentally disagree, then we have to stand up for the things we believe in and confront Russia on those issues. And that is the reality of the US-Russian relationship today.
How seriously Taiwan takes the words of President Biden about defending the island when democracy is at peril, when there hasn't been any kind of progress ending the war in Ukraine? I mean, you're talking about one thing, but then there's another hotspot going on all the time.
Well, unfortunately, there are lots of hotspots all over the world that the United States is engaged in, keeping an eye on, and trying to keep those hotspots from boiling over. Ukraine, again, I think we have been deeply engaged in Ukraine since 2014, and we will continue to be. I think Europe has a very important role to play there as well, including through the European Union. When we look at Taiwan, what we've seen in the Asia-Pacific, in the Indo-Pacific, is an increasingly assertive China. We've seen Chinese policy toward Hong Kong change. We've seen Chinese pressure on Taiwan increase. And we have had a long-standing policy toward Taiwan, which has not changed in the Biden administration. And our hope is that we will not see China undertake military action toward Taiwan. But we are continuing to stay the course on our longstanding policy there. And we see Taiwan as a vibrant democracy that is an important economic player and is also a wonderful example of how an open society can manage the COVID pandemic.
But how can you protect Taiwan?
How can we protect Taiwan?
Exactly. Well, I mean, President Biden said that the US will help Taiwan when it comes to military aggression.
My understanding is he's referring to the long-standing set of agreements we have with Taiwan, and it relates to our ongoing and deep relationship with Taiwan.
Is that also heard in China?
You'd have to ask the Chinese.
How do you can say that you are defending the democracy and the values in the case of Taiwan, but at the same time you just have to deal with China on multiple issues, let's say North Korea, for example, or some other economical issues. So there is, again, like in a Ukraine case, you have the same case with Taiwan. We see here that this is like a really good example of protecting democracy. When that fails, when we fail as a West or Western values protector, then what's left to talk about?
So the relationship with China that the U.S. has many facets to it. So there are many issues we cooperate with China on. Climate would be an example. There are many issues that we compete with China on. We, like many European countries, have a deep economic relationship with China. And then there are also issues we confront China on. And those, in many cases, stem from the fact that we have different fundamental beliefs about democracy. And the United States believes in the values that we espouse. And that's why you've seen a united transatlantic front on issues like human rights in China, the treatment of the Uyghurs. I also think that when the U.S. looks to its allies and partners to present coordinated policy on an issue like China, which I think is one way we are powerful, when we come together and say to China, this behavior is something we oppose, we reject, I do think we can have an impact on China's behavior.